I heard you once say Christianity never started as a religion, it started as a political system.
Hmm.
How did Christianity evolve from a political system to a religion?
Well, when the political system that you're living in, like Christian, let's look at Christianity under the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire, which takes over much of what we call the Middle East and North Africa and the Mediterranean area, right on up to Spain, Britain, and the UK, and into what is Turkey. This is one of the biggest empires ever built in those days. And it's in this empire what we know as Christianity today is born. Now, Christianity as a method of looking at people's spiritual system is born in Africa. Because the Ethiopian church is older than the Catholic Church, right? The ancient Sudanese church is older than the Catholic Church. But when people talk about Christianity, they start their genesis with the Catholic Church, and then Martin Luther in the 1500s. But by the time we get Martin Luther, the Ethiopian church is 1,000 years old. By the time we get the Catholic Church, the Ethiopian church is 500 years old. So we got to separate those two Christianities. I want to make that clear going in. The Christianity we know today, which starts out as Roman ideology after the Nicene Conference, where Rome has now military conquered all of what was the Greek world and the Egyptian world and the Mesopotamian world. It went there not to just conquer people. They wanted the olives. They wanted the grapes to make the wine. They wanted the wheat. They wanted the barley. They wanted the sheep. They wanted the cattle. They wanted the maize. They wanted all of the things. They wanted the silver. They wanted the iron. They wanted the gold. This is what they were invading people for, to steal their raw materials. The same reason they're doing it today on a larger, more high-tech scale. But once you do that, you got to now manage all these people. How do you do that? That's right. And so you said, well, what is it that they had that was working that we don't have? And so you call together the best of their spiritual minds at a conference called Nicaea. And he says, help me to construct a socialization process for the daily living of the people. Today we call that ideology. But then what happens, in the course of gathering all this wealth and power, you create another ideology, an economic ideology, which we now call capitalism. But to control the masses of people that feed that ideology, you still need your initial ideology, which is that socializing instrument, which we now will call religion. And religion partners with the capitalist ideology to do what we are seeing today. It's really not that complicated to watch the evolution if you just study history.
Being that Africa is such a massive landmass, many people struggle with categorizing African spirituality. Is African spirituality just the spiritual practices of the cultures we know about and have been exposed to? Or is African spirituality a representation of the spiritual practices of the entire continent?
Well, African spirituality is a misnomer because we don't approach things in Africa from an African spirituality perspective. That spirituality thing is kind of like an offshoot of how white people look at what they don't want to include in what they call religion. I talk about African sacred science, and it's universal to the continent. What's different is the ecology. You find yourself trying to explain reality in, and the environment and what's the tools are there for use to do that explaining. African spirituality is explaining cosmology and ecology to the human person and looking at the relationship between the three. What is the relationship to cosmology, cosmogony, and ecology and environment to the human being? And what is the human being's relationship to it? All right. The science that's explaining all of those things is called the African sacred science. That's what people are misnomerly calling African spirituality. It's universal to the continent because everybody's trying to explain the same thing. But if you're in the desert, you're not going to use the same tools that the person in the rainforest use. All right. If you're in the rainforest, you're not going to use the same tools that the people in the grassland plains are going to use, because what you have in your environment is different. So how do I explain the sun in the desert? what am I going to use? How do I explain the sun in the rainforest? But both of us will be trying to explain the sun because it's universal.
All right. That's you brought up something else I want to ask, right? Can the term you use sacred science, so I'll just use that moving forward for this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can sacred sciences travel to a different environment? Because if you had that experience in a certain environment, can you have that experience in another environment?
Let me explain. You as human, whether you're in Timbuktu, South Africa, Nigeria, or China, your needs is fundamentally the same. Your clothing may change, your language may change, the type of food may change depending on what that environment grows. But the food that you eat will have to produce, even though there would be different foods, it'll have to produce the same vitamins you would need no matter where else you live in the world. That's sacred science. Okay? The moon is the moon. It's not going to change whether you live in China or South Carolina. The sun is the sun. It's not going to change whether you live in South Jersey, or in Westchester County. Now, how do you explain the sun, and how do you make sure you get the healthy vitamin D energy of the sun that your body needs on a daily basis? It depends on the environment you're in. That'll determine what type of clothes you wear, what color clothes you wear, right? How heavy the clothes, how thin the clothes. That'll determine what other supplementary stuff you have to eat to make sure you're getting enough vitamin D, right? So if I need to make sure I'm getting the necessary nutrients that if I get from greens, but I'm living in an environment where I can't grow a lot of green, then can I find that same nutrient in some sort of seafood or in an animal food or in a fruit? You understand? Nothing would change. Your body's needs remain the same. But what in your environment that you have to use to fulfill that need may change because ecologically you're in a different setting. All right? The sacred science is your understanding of the setting you're in and its relationship to you and how you interrelate. You know? How do you interrelate? The sun is the sun. The sun don't go to China and say, okay, today I'm the Chinese sun, and start speaking Chinese. It's the sun. The Chinese person have to explain their relationship to the sun. They may use mythology, allegory, folklore, fairy tales as teaching tools for their population to explain the value of the sun to them and the danger of the sun to them. Same thing for us. If we lived in Congo, we would use different tools than the Chinese, but we would have to explain the same thing. What is the value of the sun to us? What is the value of the sun to the plants that we eat? What is the value? You know, when I eat a plant, I'm virtually eating sunlight, right? I'm eating sunlight. Now, in certain environments, they can't grow a whole lot of plants, so they can't get sunlight that way, so they got to eat a lot of fish to get that same vitamin D. Okay, and so African sacred science is understanding ecology, you know, environment, cosmology, and the human being's role in all of this. And so if you live in Nigeria and you got in, like your family, more than likely you're from Ghana, and more than likely you're from the Akan people where Nana and Kofi came from, and Kojo. All three of those are Akan names. And so when you left Ghana for Jamaica, nothing changed except the ecology. The Akan people, who makes up the majority of the Jamaican people's population, right? When they left Ghana and Ivory Coast, where the predominant Akan people live in West Africa, they didn't stop being Akans, nor did they need change. What changed was the environment. Now they have to identify new sources of the nutrients they need to survive. But the nutrients needed is the same nutrient needed when they were in Ghana. Now what has changed is how I acquire them and what kind of rituals I attach to them. Okay, a ritual could be a prayer, a libation, a song, a dance, a drum rhythm, you know, to celebrate that we have in this month, this fruit is growing, so breadfruit is a big deal this month. Mango coming at a certain season, The mango, people may look and think it's just some juicy, sweet, sugary fruit, but mango brings all kinds of nutrients to the table. You know what I'm saying? Well, African people knew this. You know, bananas, plantain, yams. And so I may not be able to grow the yam the way I did in Africa, but I know in this part of the environment in Jamaica, I could find yam growing wild, right? And so I have a yam festival every year in Ghana. Well, I have a yam festival in Jamaica too. But I may do a different dance than they did in Ghana because we were different people under different circumstances. But nothing has changed about our fundamental need from nature. That is the sacred science, to understand that. What is that fundamental need from nature that the human being requires? What is the fundamental understanding between knowing when the star's right there and the Big Dipper's right there and it's turned this way, at the same time on Earth, this thing is happening. And if I watch it long enough and it comes back around the next year, when the Big Dipper's there and his handle is turned this way, at the same time on Earth, that same thing is happening, I go, aha, that's the law. That's the law of God, or that's the law of nature, or that's a fundamental, that's African sacred science. Understanding the relationship between cosmology and ecology and our role in it. And much of what the West call his science is stolen African sacred science. And it didn't even steal it. We gave it to them because most of them derive into Western culture during the period of enslavement, which he calls this period of the Renaissance and Enlightenment. That's the period when he's got millions of African people's mind enslaved, creating his, what would become his, what they call that thing, Industrial Revolution.